Tonight, a Coloradan is on his way home to his family, freed from captivity in Afghanistan. His case drew national attention, and advocates tell our Angeline McCall they hope this signals more Americans could be coming home.
It's a day family and advocates have hoped for.
So I think we're all excited and certainly sharing the joy of the Coyle family.
Benjamin Gray with the James Foley Foundation knows the journey it took to see Dennis Coyle from Pueblo released after being held hostage for more than a year in Afghanistan.
It really is a pattern of abuse by the Taliban and other nations that similarly deliberately target Americans for the purpose of trying to extract concessions or policy changes from the U.S. government.
Tuesday, the Taliban-controlled government announced Coyle had spent, quote, sufficient time and had been pardoned. He had been in the country off and on for 2 decades as a linguistic expert developing language resources.
Beginning of a long road for most folks, but even though it is, of course, very joyous that he is home.
His release comes only a few weeks after Secretary of State Marco Rubio designated the country as a wrongful detention state.
The message is going to be very clear. The United States will not tolerate hostage diplomacy. They're not going to tolerate, we're going to continue to hold that regime accountable.
Gray says that designation opens up tools and sanctions.
I would have to imagine that sort of ratcheting up of pressure through that designation and the further negative consequences that could come from that.
He hopes it signals good news for other hostages, at least 40 in 19 different countries.
We are hopeful that tool can be useful for all Americans who are held wherever they are.
In a statement posted online by Dennis's family, they said they are filled with overwhelming gratitude and praise to God for sustaining Dennis's life and bringing him back home after what has been the most challenging and uncertain 421 days of their lives. The family has previously said they never received clarity as to why he was imprisoned.
Right, and this wasn't like some American tourist who did something stupid in North Korea. He had been in Afghanistan for a long time, trying to help and learn about the people there.
Yeah, in fact, for 20 years, this was someone who really dedicated his life and his life's work, right, to linguistic research and going into smaller communities and studying different kinds of dialects in Afghanistan. We do know that aid workers are often targeted, though, as part of these hostage sorts of tactics.
Yeah, grab an American, they think they have leverage. All right, Angeline McCall, thank you. Senators in D.C. are approaching a deal to end the Homeland Security funding shutdown if President Trump doesn't block it. Negotiators are working with a new sense of urgency because unpaid TSA workers continue to quit in droves, and that's been leaving long lines at America's busiest airports. Democrats in Congress, including Colorado's Michael Bennet and John Hickenlooper, have so far refused to sign off on new funding for the Department of Homeland Security unless Republicans agree to new restrictions on President Trump's mass deportation practices. Now, a group of Republican senators are warming up to the idea of a deal that would fund most of the department without authorizing new funding for ICE enforcement and removal operations. Any funding has one major roadblock: the president himself. He has said that he wants to couple any new funding deal with his push for stricter voter ID laws before the midterms. The fight over ICE funding came after a violent crackdown by immigration agents in Minneapolis, where 2 protesters with ties to Colorado were shot and killed by federal officers earlier this year. Now, leaders in Minnesota are suing the Trump administration, fighting for their right to investigate those shootings. Renee Good and Alex Preddy were shot and killed by federal agents during a federal immigration surge in Minneapolis. Good was originally from the Colorado Springs area, and Preddy's parents live in Arvada. State leaders in Minnesota say they've been iced out of the federal investigations of both shootings, so they're suing to get the evidence to carry out independent state-level investigations. The feds say that Minnesota does not have jurisdiction to investigate federal officers, but officials in Minnesota say they can't trust the feds to investigate themselves. Minnesota is not the only state wrestling with if or how to hold federal officers legally accountable for their actions. Democrats in Colorado introduced a bill that would open federal officers up to state criminal prosecution. That bill failed earlier this month. A separate bill is still under consideration at the state capitol that would let people sue federal officers for violations of their civil rights. Cash used to be king. Can't tell you the last time I carried cash. There is an ad running on our air and elsewhere saying that you will soon have to use cash to pay sales tax when you use a credit card at a store. A number of you, including Craig, Karen, Ben, wrote in asking for a Marshall Zellinger truth test treatment on that ad. which we found is misleading people about a bill at the state capitol.
How do you want to pay tax?
On the card.
Tax only paid in cash now.
What are you talking about?
What is he talking about? What you heard in this ad claims sales tax can only be paid in cash.
New law, only cash for tax.
No, there is no new law that requires cash for tax. And the words on screen also mislead. Colorado bill could force you to pay tax in cash. This ad, funded by banks and payment networks, opposes a Democrat-sponsored bill to change how swipe fees are calculated. The bill seeks to exempt sales tax from the percentage fee merchants are charged every time a credit card is swiped. Right now, merchants are charged a certain percentage on the total amount charged to a credit card. The merchant pays the fee. The bank that backs the credit card gets the money. Illinois was the first state to pass a law like this, requiring taxes and tips to not be included in the swipe fee percentage. That law is now in court. A federal judge last month upheld the law, and in her ruling, the judge acknowledged compliance challenges for financial institutions. Quote, "These compliance costs, among others, are undeniable, but state and federal laws will always require some kind of compliance cost no matter who bears it." A global payment consultant group tracks swipe fees on sales tax and lists Colorado merchants as paying $217 million in 2024.
Mom and pop stores get extra costs. You get hassled on how you use your cards.
First, if the mom and pop store does not have to pay the fee on sales tax, the mom and pop store would save money. The cost could be from new technology that merchants might have to upgrade if banking institutions and payment networks figure out how to make the math work without requiring someone to pay two different ways.
There are other states considering bills like this, New York and Texas. An advocate for the change tells me the retailer industry has pitched the idea that, hey, keep the system the same, but have the banks reimburse merchants after the fact. I've also been told that the data exists, and it's just a matter of paying for technology that can figure out how the zeros and ones make the math work differently on the back end that nobody really understands.
And Marshall, when we talk about tax rates, right, different products are taxed in different ways, right, depending on if it's like, like a gas tax or there's sin taxes on various things that are enjoyable to consume. But we're not talking about a situation where people are forced to pay cash for any of them in reality.
Right. The bill itself does not say require people to pay cash for sales tax. What it is saying is if you're changing what the merchants can be charged by the banks, then you might have to say, well, if we're divvying that out, figure out how they're going to pay for this because we're not going to deal with it with the credit card machine.
For just a second there, I pictured myself as one of those old school guys that carries like the roll of 20s with the rubber band around it and takes it off and just kind of like peels it off, Those guys always look like real bosses. Marshall, thank you. It has been just more than a year since Aurora's then conservative majority city council voted to strengthen the city's camping ban, allowing sweeps of homeless camps without notice, even when there was not shelter space available. The new progressive majority city council in Aurora just voted last night to reverse that policy. After hours of debate, Aurora City Council narrowly passed an ordinance requiring 72 hours notice before the city sweeps encampments. The city's homelessness response team says that's already been their practice in most cases, except for exceptions with encampments that pose a public safety risk or encampments on CDOT property along interstates, which are swept without notice. Conservatives on the city council, who are now in the minority, say the 72-hour notice undermines the effectiveness of the city's public camping ban. Progressives say immediate sweeps are not humane or realistic.
When you give the 72 hours at a minimum, we're going to see encampments that take advantage of the 72 hours. They're going to then move, and then the clock starts all over again with 72 hours. You're going to see a huge problem.
What it proves when we are laying everything on the line about this 72 hours, to oppose the 72 hours, is that the cruelty was always the point.
City council members you heard from there in order were first conservative Francois Bergen and then progressive Allison Coombs. The city of Aurora says most camps take days to deal with, regardless of the city's ordinance. It takes time to arrange the contractors to clean up the camps and to transport the people living there to shelter space. Colorado saved a lot of money on snow plowing this winter. Now CDOT is hoping those savings can go a long way toward preventing wildfires. And take a look at this map of Colorado put out by a candidate for governor. Now look close and tell me if you see anything funny about it. At least 9 of those cities and towns are in the wrong place. Some aren't even close. That's next. Well, if there's any good to come out of our lack of snow this year, Colorado's Department of Transportation says it has money left over from snow plowing, and they can use it to help prevent wildfires. CDOT says it has about 12 mil extra from its snow and ice removal budget, so those savings are being used to remove dead or dying trees along highways, trying to create fire breaks to keep fires from spreading in this summer's drought.
Trees become a way for fire to arch over the highway, and so fires can shut down for days on end a highway, which is critically important for first responders as well as for people that live around those highways.
CDOT's reaching out to tree removal companies to do the fire mitigation work along the interstates, and state employees are going to focus on 2-lane highways, particularly on the Front Range. People living in Denver are likely to face water restrictions as of this week. Board of Water Commissioners is expected to declare a state-1 drought tomorrow. First time that's happened in more than a decade. Denver Water says its reservoirs are at 80% of capacity, lower than it should be for this time of year. So Denver's expected to go above and beyond the typical summer outdoor watering restrictions for the first time since 2013. Stage 1 restrictions would include limiting outdoor watering and power washing to 2 days per week. Attention, power washers. It would limit how often commercial fleet vehicles can be cleaned, and you'd have to ask to get a glass of water at a restaurant. It would also tell hotels to cut back on how often they are proactively changing customer sheets. Water officials say the goal is to cut water usage by 20% from now until the end of April. Chris Bianchi, water restrictions this early, but again, another scorcher in March.
Another one. And Kyle, we broke a daily record that was 130 years old, 81 today, the old record from 1896. Trivia question. Who was president of the United States in 1896?
1896. Shoot, I'm gonna go McKinley, but I think McKinley was right after this. I'm gonna go McKinley.
McKinley won the presidential election in 1896.
Ah, dang. Okay.
The president was Grover Cleveland. So close.
Me again.
But he won, yes, he won. To your point, William McKinley won presidential election November 3rd of 1896, took office the following January. 81 degrees today, breaking an 130-year-old record. We don't have too many more records like this that go back into the 1800s, at least daily records, breaking the old record by 5 degrees. This is also our 4th daily record high in 6 days here in Denver. This is a map, another map. I'm sorry, I'm sounding like a broken record here, folks. I don't know what to tell you. This is a map straight out of June, even early July, that I'm showing you smack dab at the end of March. Typically snowstorm season for us here in Colorado. Not in March 2026. Big ridge high pressure, that will continue to scoot its way off to the east, and that will bring us some more record high temperatures for tomorrow. Forecast high of 89 tomorrow. This would be our hottest March temperature ever recorded, breaking the record that was set 4 days ago, back on Saturday when we topped out at 86. I mean, I don't know. Again, I'm out of adjectives to describe how ridiculous this heat wave is. We will briefly cool down on Friday. We'll get some late showers Thursday night, Friday morning. Stays kind of cloudy and cool on Friday before we warm right back up again to, you guessed it, 80 degrees this upcoming weekend.
So much about politics is bleak and depressing these days. You got to take a good laugh when you can get one. I had one this weekend when I saw the map of Colorado put out by Republican Scott Bottom's campaign for governor. This shows all the places that he's done campaign stops, except at least 9 of the towns and cities on this map are nowhere near their actual locations. Maybe we can zoom in for you here. Far southeast Colorado, where the campaign put Strasburg, yeah, that is absolutely not where Strasburg is. It's like 150 miles to the northeast. Then up there along the Kansas line, that would be the famous border town of Lyman. Nope, that is not where Lyman goes either. And that is just the start of a slew of clearly AI-generated messes on that map. Republican gubernatorial candidate Scott Bottom's campaign messing up a map of Colorado is kind of funny, but it's not a big deal, right? Mistakes happen, and those glaring AI mistakes are particularly easy to spot these days. Kind of made for a fun game to spot all of the misplaced cities and towns. But it raises a larger issue of how often we in the news media are sucked into fake outrage over little mistakes like that. Now, I didn't hear any Democrats pretending to be outraged by a GOP candidate's butchered map of Colorado. But stop and think for a second if it was a Democratic candidate for governor, coming off like he couldn't find his aspen with both hands or didn't know his holly from a hole in the ground. We both know that we would hear all about how disrespectful that was to rural Colorado, how it showed the candidate didn't care about people outside the Denver-Boulder corridor. Then the fake outrage would trudge its predictable path from the political figures to their favorite radio and TV stations, and then eventually most every media outlet in Colorado would be talking at least about the reaction to the mix-up, as if the outrage is real, and as if it was news. It's not. And most journalists know better. But fake outrage gets attention and clicks, and covering it keeps journalists from being called biased. So too often, we go along with it even when we know there is nothing to it. We have too many real problems to keep getting worked up over fake ones. A campaign's messed up map of Colorado is not a real problem. I don't think this one will be treated as if it is. And if we're smart and honest, the next potential fake outrage won't either.
So I think it's really cool to work for a department that's proactive instead of reactive.
Firefighters face increased cancer risk because of their job. A department says it takes just a few minutes to give their people peace of mind. That's next. There are the daily risks firefighters face, and then there's the long-term job risk of cancer. Our Amy Hunter introduces us to a department making early detection a priority.
Record-breaking heat and high winds have made life busy for firefighters across the state. But even without a lot of free time, Mountain View Fire Rescue knows there are some things that can't wait.
We are here to do some esophageal cancer screening.
The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health says firefighters have a 62% higher risk of esophageal cancer. To help detect it, the department held a Check Your Food Tube event.
So I think it's really cool to work for a department that's proactive instead of reactive.
As a firefighter paramedic, Ron Waterman has seen it all.
I see a lot of the medical side of this with traffic accidents and medical calls, but as a firefighter as well, I also go on structure fires.
But this test was a first.
We've done other screenings of all of our different organs, but the esophageal screening, this one specifically, is new to us.
It's not a fun process.
But they're going to swallow the little capsule. The capsule will reach their stomach, where the nurse will blow up a little balloon. She'll pull it back about 5 centimeters to collect the cells in the distal esophagus and then remove it.
Lindsay Wasoki with the medical device company Lucid Diagnostics knows these tests are valuable tools.
So it's very important that we get them screened early to catch things during the precancerous stages so that it can be fully eradicated.
An abnormal result isn't a guarantee a firefighter has cancer.
So it just means kind of like a check engine light, or we detected some abnormalities in the distal esophagus, and then they would get referred on.
But catching it early can make all the difference.
It could be life or death, right? to be able to find a cancer in its early stages and be able to take care of it early than being reactive and then having to deal with it after the fact.
For Next, I'm Amy Hunter.
Back with feedback, probably about that map, next. You want to talk about the map, but you actually want to talk about the presidential trivia even more. When Chris Bianchi came out here and bodied me with asking me who the president was in 1896, I incorrectly said it was William McKinley. Leslie said, I just threw out Grover Cleveland at my TV. I had no idea. You could have heard me scream a block away when Chris Bianchi said his name. It was Grover Cleveland. But then some of you nerds, Jim, or who is it, Rich, Teresa, pointed out that we said that, again, McKinley wouldn't have been inaugurated until January of 1897, but back then presidential inaugurations weren't until March. This is why I love you people. We try to make you smarter, you make us smarter. We all walk away somewhat confused. See you next time.